So King Gizzard released a new song called Honey, and I thought I'd talk about it because it seems to be dividing a lot of people on whether or not it fits inside the Gizzverse. And for those wondering where I see it, the short answer is yes, but it depends on what kind of connections you make. Let me explain. When the song came out, a few people had already made the connection with the song's title to what happens in Nonagon Infinity and Infest the Rat's Nest, and some have even made memes because of such connections that I actually enjoyed. But I think those memes also reflect the larger general consensus that Honey is just a love song from Stu to his wife and has nothing to do with the Gizzverse. I still agree with this sentiment, but in classic King Gizzard fashion, there's also a lot of double meanings to take away from Honey, and I actually see it as both a love song and a song to do with the Gizzverse. So hopefully this video acts as another bridge between those that analyze the Gizzverse and those that make memes about it, which is a long-standing tradition that I hope still continues. And that comes from someone who spends way too many hours analyzing their work. Because regardless of the jokes that I've seen, some of which have included memes that featured me in them, which on a side note was one of my life's ambitions, it's hard to go past the connections with the song Honey with albums in the past, since it does seem just to be too much of a coincidence to not be referring to what we know from before. The most obvious connection being from Nonagon Infinity with Gamma Knife and the phrase milk and honey that I noted in volume 1 and have seen a few people pick up on as well. As I talked about in that video, that phrase is connected with a spiritual sense of yearning for fulfillment, and I've always thought that it refers to the need to achieve inner happiness somehow, and within the context of the Gizzverse, believe that this referred to achieving immortality as being one of the ways to do so. So to me, Honey feels like another nice way of reaffirming such an idea that even if it is just a love song, whoever this person is in Stu's life, it's obviously giving him a real sense of fulfillment in his own life, and that with this special somebody, he feels like he's achieved internal happiness with them, which I think is a neat way of expressing how much someone means to you by combining those notions of happiness and immortality. In terms of whether or not Honey connects to another song from Nonagon Infinity with Big Fig Wasps, I don't think that it's as strong of a connection since it is comparing a wasp to a bee, which are two different things, but I can still see how people could link the two, and if anything, I think it's just a fortunate coincidence, which is something that I've also seen people believe for the connection between Honey and that phrase, the door to hell is amber from Infest the Rat's Nest, since amber is an orange and yellow type of color that obviously links back to honey. However, I'm actually less convinced that the connection between honey and amber is just a coincidence because of this double meaning that amber is of a fossilized tree resin, which you'd often see as a way of preserving animals and plants who have been drawn into this soft, sticky tree resin that encapsulates them, essentially Mother Earth's way of cryogenically freezing them for the future. And I bring all of this up because if you're a fan of Steven Spielberg, you might have seen this little known movie called Jurassic Park, which I think kinda did well at the box office, but in that movie, you'll see that amber was actually used to recover the DNA of dinosaurs from mosquitoes who were preserved in these amber resins, and there's even a whole amber mine dedicated to extracting these long-lost genome sequences, ultimately a way to make dinosaurs immortal. All of which to me is just a clever way of again reaffirming that idea that the door to hell opened by Nonagon Infinity is the door that opens the secrets or the ability to immortality, because the door to hell is amber, and amber has those links to immortality, which is something that I'm surprised I didn't mention in the actual volumes and maybe should update later on. So since we've already spoken about how honey has that same connection to immortality, I feel like the connection between honey and amber is much stronger since they link to that same idea. Oh, and before we get to the next point, shout out to the comment of the year from Postsan on Reddit. Moving away from Nonagon Infinity for the time being, a few have also mentioned the link with Honey and the song Acarine, which I covered in volume 4, which is another obvious connection because the song Acarine is literally telling the story of a honeybee who has been infected by a parasite and is causing it to undergo a painful transformation. And I've always viewed that this song is a larger metaphor for being transformed to become a cyborg, or at least describing the process of doing so. So because of this, I think it has less to do with the song Honey, and it could be more of just a nice nod or a fortunate coincidence, but I can still also see that connection between honey and immortality or spiritual enlightenment and fulfillment between these two songs, even if their lyrics are describing two very different things overall. One that is about love and the other about this painful process of becoming a cyborg. Maybe the former is the hopeful ambitions of finding the secrets to immortality, and the latter is the dark reality of what occurs when you open that door. And one last thing before we actually get to playing the song. When I asked you guys on a YouTube community post what you guys thought about this song and its connections to the Gizzverse, one of you by the name of Insanity of the Future, which on a side note is a great username, actually pointed out a potential link to King Gizzard's live set on KEXP, which when I researched into it also had an altered monologue for Han-Tyumi in the song Han-Tyumi the Confused Cyborg from Murder of the Universe, and towards the end of this altered monologue there's an interesting mention about syrup.
I am on the altar. I wonder. Sanctuary of eternal rest. I wish to consume sickly syrup and liquor from my many timbers. Take me into the moonless night. I need it. Any way I pass will do.
I wouldn't say it's directly connecting Han-Tyumi to honey, although I've seen a few people mention that honey is just bee vomit, and thus there's this link with Han-Tyumi's own vomit coffin, which is kinda interesting because I've never thought of honey as bee vomit before, though I wouldn't say that there's a strong enough connection to make there because of it. But I do see an interesting contrast of how Han-Tyumi is obviously talking about wanting to vomit and the urge to die, which in that altered monologue from the KXP set is to him like having saccharine syrup, meaning a very sweet sugary syrup, and because of that I can't really dismiss this connection because it really does feel like he's actually talking about honey. Maybe honey to Han-Tyumi is again something that he believes will give him spiritual fulfillment, but not fulfillment in life, since he sees honey as a form of fulfillment, but in death. Okay, let's actually get to playing the song. The line about magic potion on one hand has the obvious sense that it's referring to something that is giving someone, most likely to himself, that feeling of joy, happiness, and a sense of new life in a world that in his eyes is completely broken. But again, I feel like this is another tie back into what we talked about before with milk and honey, and one of the general themes from King Gizzard's work with the yearning for spiritual fulfillment, but also fulfillment in general, and finding that magic potion could be about finding that same type of fulfillment with someone or something. Though I think I might be reaching to say that this person singing honey is Han-Tyumi himself, but I'm not opposed to it, and I still like that idea of how if it was Han-Tyumi, it echoes that same feeling of how Han-Tyumi found fulfillment through Nonagon Infinity, and ultimately immortality, despite the world around him crumbling, which I think is also subtly hinted at through the video, as we watch Stu playing his guitar at sunset within an industrial area, again fitting in with that idea of how the world is going dark around him, but he still remains upbeat about life because of certain good aspects in it that have given him fulfillment in his life.
Life is what you're doing while we're floating through it. Cut the ropes and slack them while we get the nightmare.
I like the line about life is what you do in it as opposed to life is what you do with it, which is just a simple but clever way of emphasizing you are what you do in life, though I've also seen some people joke about how simple the entire music video is. The line about floating through it feels too specific to not be a coincidence to the other songs in the Gizzverse that we've covered, but also some others in the discography, the most obvious songs being Sleep Drifter and The River. Of course, it could just be part of Stu's own lyricism and the way he likes to use metaphors in songs, but I like how it links back to those songs Sleep Drifter and The River with the idea of travelers floating through life on their journey to Venus or just to find immortality. For example, in The River, there's also a mention of a girl that would deliver to someone who floats and trusts in the river. And this mention of floating also reminds me of another song from an album that I haven't covered in the Gizzverse yet, with Float Along and Fill Your Lungs, from the album of the same name. Because on the surface, that song describes a sort of hallucinogenic type of experience, but also hints towards being about a lover or someone you can't stop seeing wherever you go and enjoy taking them in. Another link I've seen with floating is with the song Floating Fire from Quarters, but I don't think they're strongly connected as much as Sleep Drifter, The River, and Float Along and Fill Your Lungs. The endless motion line suggests how life is forever moving, with how time itself is forever moving, and that nothing could ever stop it, ignoring the ultimate heat death of the universe conjecture, which is a notion that I feel reflects how life always finds a way, even in under some of the harshest conditions, or with a world that is broken, which again reminds me of Jurassic Park, but could also be hinting at life through space and floating through it, with inertia taking you forever in one path, with no resistance. Although I think that it's slightly reaching, even if it is a nice idea that will link back to what we know in Venetian 1 and Venetian 2 from Infest the Rat's Nest. The drinking to that notion is an obvious representation of people cleaning glasses and celebrating together how life is actually good, which reminds me of that clip from Invisible Face when the travelers drink from one glass that is passed around, and that also might have something to do with that magic potion line that was mentioned before. Like the wind of a sail, I'll steer you along, is again referring to some person that is being admired deeply, fitting in with that love song theme of this song, but again, it just seems too coincidental to not be referring to the river, and maybe even travelers on a ship along its streams, on what could be this big ocean of life. Which at this point, I think it ultimately means that the river could be a nice metaphor for the journey of life that we're all on, and hopefully we find happiness, immortality, and divinity along the way, or at least by the end of it. The germs outside that I'll keep you from line feels way too poignant about the current state of the world, and it reminds me of the previous song called Superbug from Infest the Rat's Nest, which was about the world being infected by some sort of virus or bug. Who would have thought that the Gizzverse could have predicted the pandemic? And there are some that will say you can't learn anything from music. The ending of Honey also starts playing the introduction to another song, similar to what happened with Nonagon Infinity and Flying Microtonal Banana, and I've seen a few people already make comments that it sounds like a couple of other songs. For example, towards the end of Sleep Drifter,
And you're the magic potion.
and the beginning of Infinite Rise from Quarters.
And you're the magic potion.
For me, I think it fits in more so with Infinite Rise, but I don't believe it's a direct tie-in, as I'm more inclined to see Honey transitioning into another song from this new album, which looks like it's going back to those flying microtonal banana roots, not just from the way it sounds, but also the cover art of Honey's title, which you can see all these microtonal notes on it. Again, this suggests that this song and potentially this new album will be another connection to the Gizzverse through their themes and lyrics, if not at least through their music and regular use of motifs that occur through different songs in different albums, which is also covered by another great video that goes through a few examples. And that's it from the song. In terms of where Honey fits in with the Gizzverse timeline, I know that Stu wrote the song a couple years ago, and it might be one of those songs that came out about during the production of Flying Microtonal Banana in that year of 2017, which musically for the band feels like an explosion of creativity with 5 albums being released in just 1 year. Almost like it was a big bang moment in their musical journey, which by now is an incredibly fitting coincidence for their whole themes about humankind's place in the universe, and I really hope the next album's title is this. But if I had to place it somewhere right now, I can see it being put somewhere before Murder of the Universe and just after the events of Nonagon Infinity, though again, I think it's way too early to tell and we'll see what happens in the future, which according to some amazing detective work by a user called There's Your Problem, another great username, looks like we'll have 2 tracks being released called Timeland and Smoke and Mirrors. On the face of it, this seems to be hinting towards Polygondwanaland as that place near the beginning of time, and maybe the unraveling of something that appears to be like magic, but in reality isn't, and I can't wait to hear what it's going to be. Alright, that's all I have to say for now. Thank you to my amazing Patreons, to those subscribers who commented, and for you, the viewer, for watching. I'll see you in the next one.
Alright, so what I think we should do... There's like... In the song, there's 2 real short ones. There's going to be hell, hell, hell for like a second. But I think we do the long ones first because they're going to be funnier. Okay. And it's just like there is no rule. It's basically just... I'm going to cut it up probably. Mm-hmm. So it's real long, goes for like 5 minutes, and all we do is chant hell constantly. Hell! 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 Hell!
Where I dwell.
I can't do that again.
Yeah, I lost one. Let's do it again.